Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, today's Upswell, Unleashing Innovation. I'm delighted to be representing the Upcycled Food Association and Food Foundation here today as Emeritus Board Member by bringing together some esteemed colleagues in the area of innovation, product development, R&D in upcycling, so that they can share with you some of their pearls of wisdom, some of the learnings that they've made, some of the challenges that they face, and also looking forward to the future, how they're going to grow their business and also the upcycling category using technology. I am going to, oh yes, sorry. Before I move on, I need to say that this webinar today is because we are celebrating the 5th year anniversary of the Upcycle Food Association, which is quite remarkable. I'm not sure many of us thought we would get here, but here we are, and delighted to be here. Today's webinar, Unleashing Innovation, is one of 5 webinars that I encourage you to sign up to and to listen to. I will be back again on November the 7th, talking about upcycled ingredients as a panelist this time, not as a moderator. And yeah, I'm sure you will be enlightened. And at the end of the series, you'll be like, "What? How did I not know these people? How did I not know about upcycling? I feel informed. I feel nourished with knowledge." And I feel that we will have celebrated our 5th year anniversary appropriately. Next slide, please. It is important for you to know that this webinar is recorded. So if you've signed up for this webinar, but you couldn't make it and you're watching this later, hello, you made the right decision. If you could submit your questions to any of the panelists as we go along in the Q&A feature, I will be moderating the panel, and and we are keeping this fairly informal. We're keeping this in more discussive. So I will use the questions as we go through this discussion over the next hour. We will share a follow-up email with all the speakers' information and resources. So if you want to get in touch with Webb or Roland or Christina after this webinar, then you will be able to, because we'll provide those details. Okay. Moving on, we'll get on with welcome and introductions. I've done the welcome. I'm going to introduce my panel. I'm going to let them talk about themselves and their work for briefly. I am joined by Webb Girard, who is from Culinex, Roland Laux from Girard, and also Christina O'Keefe from Kerry. So, Roland, would you like to kick us off and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. Thank you for your introduction. My name is Roland Laux. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Girard. Girard is a food tech startup based in Switzerland, founded mid-22. And our technology doubles the yield from culinary nuts without planting one single additional tree.
Very good. Thank you, Roland. Webb, would you like to go next?
Certainly. Webb Girard, Director of Art Research and Development at Culinex. We're a product development firm based in Seattle, Washington. If it's edible, we work on it. So as we do our development work for our clients, we're always interested in understanding new and innovative ingredients and their functionality and how we can address food waste.
And Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina O'Keefe, head of sustainability for Kerry North America. So Kerry is a leader in science-backed sustainable nutrition with a goal to reach 2 billion consumers with sustainable nutrition solutions by 2030. So we have really looking at how can we shape the future around nutrition and while minimizing the impact on the planet, which is where upcycled comes in as part of minimizing that impact while also extending the use of nutrition and getting that to multiple people and generations to come.
Thank you, Christina. Now, this panel is about unleashing innovation. So I'm going to bring it back to sort of R&D and product development and technology. I'm going to start with you, Webb. When you sit at Culinex and you talk about upcycling, what does innovation, disruptive innovation, R&D, product development look like for you within the sphere of upcycling and reutilizing waste?
Yeah, a lot of our work is driven by our clients and their messaging. So their lens and their drives are a lot what we consider, but as we're looking into sourcing ingredients, we're always of a mind of what's out there, whether it be recaptured materials from milking operations or juicing operations to how imperfect fruits and vegetables can be used in the development cycle, and seeing how we can add form and function and nutrition and reduction of waste through the products. But as we're working in different areas, if I don't need to see the blemish on an apple, but I can have diced pieces and we can reclaim some of that material that would otherwise be wasted, it really goes forward in development.
Great. And Roland, what about Renat? I mean, Renat is trying to disrupt an existing system, so I'm interested to hear what innovation and technology in upcycling really means for you.
Yeah, our technology, I can describe, instead of shelling the culinary nuts and only using the kernels, we don't even think about shelling them, but process them as a whole, together with their outer hard shell, in shell, so-called, to semi-finished nut products, ingredients like nut milk and nut flour. Why does this make sense? Well, the mass of the nut shell on average equals the mass of the nut kernel. And by incorporating the shell into the processing, we double the yield from 1 pound of nuts. And as these shells are mainly fiber, and our vision is to bring all this valuable fiber into the nutritional circle instead of burning them or using them as bedding for the dairy farms, generating very, very low value. So in our case, the innovation is possible thanks to a new technology. We don't really upcycle. I call it we in-cycle. The thinking behind is all streams are mainstream. And by incorporating the shells of culinary nuts, we basically avoid side streams that need to be upcycled later.
And this in-cycling process is unique to Renat. That's part of Renat's IP, which is why you can't share more with us, I guess.
Right. That's the basic idea of Renat, and there we have some patents on this method that we plan to license to food companies and to nut processors, and focuses on almonds in business development phase 1 in the United States. Yes.
I was going to ask, just as just for me, when you mention culinary nut, what do you mean exactly?
It's almonds, it's hazelnuts, walnuts, peanuts, all kind of nuts that we're looking at, and our starting point has been almonds. And it's a wonderful situation in the United States where 8 of 10 almonds of this world are grown in California, Central Valley. And there really we are dedicating all our resources to bring the first product to market next year. Okay,
great. And Christina, it's worth mentioning that Kerry has been with the UFA from the beginning, right? And have been a sponsor of the Upcycle Food Foundation Research Fellows Program for the last couple of years, and within day-to-day business has been partnering with with various different concerns in the upcycling arena. So it's been front and center for you for a while, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at upcycling and innovation in general, I think Kerry has seen it always as an opportunity, but also as an opportunity to really change a complex food system. When we think about innovation in general, we probably break it down into like 3 different categories, where we would say innovating for today is really through application innovation. So how can we be disruptive innovators using our current technologies within our own portfolio? So how do we reuse our current assets and technologies to use alternative byproducts or different materials to create similar type ingredients? I think when we look at how do we innovate for tomorrow, that's really around technology innovation. So new differentiated technologies that deliver against future consumer needs. So what does the technology of tomorrow look like, and how is it different than what we currently are utilizing? And then I say the third kind of pillar of that would be open innovation, which is where Dr. Lara, you were kind of talking about. It's like collaboration around external partnerships in academia, universities, with startups, or with suppliers to really future-proof our leading technology portfolio and bring really cutting-edge innovation to customers as the kind of the middleman within the food organization, right? So we're working with ingredient suppliers, and then we're working with a lot of the big name CPGs and retails and food service organizations to help bring that to mainstream consumers. And then for us, all of that is brought together at the heart of innovation. We would say that's FoodCraft, where we use our team of 80 plus food craft experts that are trained in culinary arts, have worked in the best restaurants, hotels, and bars, and are baristas, and bringing all of those scientific and technologies together to really meet consumer needs and demands and bring it into everyday life of how can we utilize those upcycled products and educate consumers, but also make them taste great and make them wanted, right, within consumer needs.
I'm going to come back to FoodCraft in a minute, because I think we need to have an honest conversation about the fact that FoodCraft with upcycled ingredients and or products can be one of the challenges. And I'm interested to hear how you at Kerry and also at Culinex and also at Rena are sort of facing into that. But I wanted to come back to the technology for tomorrow. Do you have an example of what that looks like, Christina, that you can feel comfortable sharing with the audience? Because I think that could be really helpful.
I'm thinking I think for technology for tomorrow, there's a lot of different ideas out there of how we can utilize like fermentation. Now, I wouldn't say it's a new technology, fermentation, but how we utilize it with new source materials, I would say is newer to how that looks. And I would say that's kind of at the forefront of my mind at this point, is how do you use kind of traditional technologies, but innovating them in a new way with different source materials, or maybe what you were talking about, using the whole shell of the material. Like, how can we do it differently, be creative, and ensuring that we're using, I like to say, the whole material, right? And I think that's where, when we talk about upcycled, for me, it's typically, we're talking about the use of waste or byproducts or food loss during processes, and saying, how do you use that source material, the virgin material, completely, so that there is nothing left, right? And that we're utilizing it for consumption or for nutrition or for applications, so functionality. I think that's where I would say that's where the technology for tomorrow really looks like. How can you use something new for functionality? How can you use something new for taste components? How can you use something new for nutritional benefits?
Yeah, fermentation, the oldest process in almost biblical, actually, in terms of the process, but obviously very new, being utilized differently in the world of novel foods and the future of foods. Coming back to FoodCraft, we are not here. Our purpose, we have no purpose if at the end of the day we can't get people to eat food, right? And we can't get them to experience food. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, one of the biggest challenges we face working in the upcycled world, and I've been working in the upcycled world for a while now, is to get people to try something different, and then also get them to like something from a taste perspective so that they want to try it again. And Roland, I was interested in the fact that your process utilizes the whole nut, and obviously if you use the whole nut and you use the shell and the kernel, then there's a lot of fiber. And I've been working on trying to get Americans to eat more fiber in their food for a while now, and still only 10% of Americans get their recommended daily allowance of fiber and would prefer to buy Metamucil than have fiber in their food. So I'm interested to hear how Rena is tackling this challenge of consumer acceptance and food craft, as Kerry calls it, this love of foods that might be a little bit different, because let's be honest, most people think that food grows in a straight line. And you know, every piece of food and or product looks exactly the same dimensions, same quality, same taste every single time, because that's how we've all been taught. And if we're truly going to adapt to a more sustainable food system, then we have to accept what growing food really means, and what reutilizing and as Christina says, using the whole food really looks like, and what it really means. So how are you tackling that arena? And then I'll come on to you, Webb, and then you, Christina.
Well, the idea of not shelling the nuts came up on a hazelnut field in Turkey. We then processed the first batch of hazelnuts, crushing our mill, because we have never done that before. The shell is very hard. It's like stone. So we had to retry several times. But to your question, we add water to the milling in a ratio 1:4. So we have one pound of unshelled or in-shell nuts, call it almonds, and then we add 4 times the amount of water, and then we go to the milling phase. We do a wet milling, resulting in a slurry. And this slurry still contains your bigger particles. It has all in the kernel and the shell. And this slurry goes then directly into a decanter, which does a phase separation, resulting in a nut milk and in a solid phase, which then we dry to a nut flour, which can be used in application in a lot of products like bakery products, chocolate products, etc. So now to your question about the taste. The reason why this project was started really was when we first tasted the milk that came out of the system in our first trials a couple of years ago, because we have never had such a creamy, tasteful plant-based drink. So that was the starting point, right? And also the simplicity of just milling the whole nut with water, resulting in a drink that is delicious, was very convincing. Because if you know how some plant-based drinks are produced today, it's a lot of process step, it's a lot of treatment, it's enzyme, etc., etc. In our drink, we have in-shell almonds or hazelnuts and water. And how should that taste bad, right? Because you have everything in. The shell, that is a question, is of no taste, you know, at the beginning, but we roast the nut in the shell, and through the high temperature of the roasting and devectorization, it was very surprising to see that we generate some exciting aroma like cocoa and vanilla, which then makes our flour perfectly adapted also for applications like in confectionery. So yes, taste is key. Otherwise, you know, we will not sell one of the licenses in the future. But our consumer tests so far, they have show really some promising results.
I have to say, you described that really well. I now need to get some of this creamy, milky, cocoa vanilla roasted drink. I need to have it now. I can't wait to try it. Webb, how has Culinex tackled the taste challenge when it comes to upcycling with their clients?
I think you have to look at it as a holistic picture from, you know, whole food ingredients that are close enough to off the farm that are being used in other ways, onions and carrots and celery and broths, to more refined functional ingredients that have limited uses. Something like carrot pulp left over from juicing is essentially an inert material, and it has usage level limitations to it. So you're trying to build other food systems around it, and it goes past taste into texture, into functionality, getting some of those sandy cardboard characteristics that may go into it. And sometimes your supply outweighs the demand. So you're struggling with having someone make enough material for you to use, but consuming enough material for them to make. So there's a little bit of a balance back and forth on getting some of that supply in there. But once you kind of on that scale understand functionality and usage and product usage, I mean, I could probably use a lot of carrot pulp into a smoothie or into maybe a frozen dessert or something where I'm going to get better use and less disruption to the profile, to the texture, to the flavor, as if I were trying to make a cracker or a bar or something that's really limiting below 2% of its usage, where I might be able to get 10-15% of frozen dessert without any adverse characteristics, or all the way up to a funny looking carrot that I could drop in a stock pot and who cares what it looks like. It's going to end up contributing the nutrition, flavor, and parameters on it. So along that whole scale and into what product you're putting on really drives its usage, and then who's manufacturing. And I think some of the challenges with flavor on like just the carrot pulp example, you have to have a manufacturer close by where the pulping operation is in order to utilize that ingredient, because otherwise you're shipping weight. And are you actually going to be able to cost effectively do it? But if you in turn dry it out, you're spending a lot of energy drying it out, and you're dismissing some of that savings or some of that upcycling. So there's kind of a network or a relationship that has to happen with proximity and drive and cost and value that pulls all into it. And that really impacts how you put it into the product and its resulting eating quality.
Christina, I'm interested, building on something that Webb mentioned, I'm interested in that sort of food craft cost balance, because I think one of the other challenges of working in an upcycling field or working within the upcycled ingredient sphere is that often we're dealing with material that may be 1.5 or 2x versus the standard quote unquote material, because obviously there's some processing involved, so that you need to pay for the resource and all of the energy and so on and so on. So and many of the people listening to this call and those of us who've been on the journey for the last 5 years, we're commercial, but we need a bigger scale in order to get those cost of goods down. So how do you see that at Kerry? And because from where I'm sitting, I'm thinking, well, this is all great, but we need a wider adoption of upcycled ingredients in more foods in order to get that scale. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that is one of the key challenges that we have with using upcycled ingredients and making upcycled products. At Kerry, we kind of break it down first on like 2 steps. One is like feasibility, like does the material perform the way that we're looking? What can we get out of the material? Can we use it as a replacer, or is it novel that it's going to be a whole new type of product? Once we've decided that it's feasible, right, we can use the material or we can convert the material to a usable ingredient, then we go to viability. And that's where we start looking at what is the scale that we have to work with. Can we get the materials, as Webb said, in a feasible way where we can keep the material safe, that we're not shipping water, that we can keep it at temperature or whatever we need to ensure that the raw material or the upcycled ingredient is maintained in transport or processed properly. And then what is the viability from a financial standpoint, right? I think we have to be able to sell it, right? The consumer has to be able to want it. And there's some things that at this point, the consumers are not going to go for. So we try to focus on those that we think we can commercialize and get moving for quick wins or quick adoptions within the consumers. And that's because we got to be able to scale quickly in order to mitigate the increase in costs for processing. And we also got to think about affordability and accessibility, right? For a consumer, they may not want to pay more, a premium that is of a large scale, right? So they may take, a few cents or a couple extra dollars to pay for an upcycled ingredient because it's means more to them, and they know that they're contributing and supporting the reduction of food waste. But we can't make it so much more that it becomes inaccessible for many consumers. So I always say it's kind of two steps, right? It's the feasibility. Can you use it? Does it function properly? Can we make it taste great? Do we think that it's going to perform? And then viability. Will the consumer buy it? Can we get it down to a cost that is reasonable? And can we move it and process it in a way that we can keep the financial benefit there?
It's good that we moved on to talking about the consumer, because that obviously is my next question. You may have all heard that there's kind of an election going on at the moment. At top of mind, obviously, I would say there are many fundamental issues that are being discussed, but the top two issues that are being discussed are immigration, but also the economy. And, there's a lot of discussion about the fact that, food costs more nowadays, and people are finding it difficult to, buy what they normally would buy with the same budget. And I don't know about you, but I'm not really interested in working in the food industry to make very expensive products that only a subsection of people can afford. I'm really only interested in creating good food, healthy food, nutritious food, tasty food that is democratic and available to all. So we are faced with a problem as a community, which is that I think we're all here because we want to we want to grow a business, right? And we want to have jobs and have livelihoods. And at the same time, I think we do accept that we want food to be accessible. We want food to be nutritious. So I hear a lot about consumers paying more for quote unquote sustainable food. And I don't believe it. I'm skeptical of that research, because I think when you go to a supermarket, your shopping decision is very different versus what I'm filling out in a questionnaire at my kitchen table. So I'm just wondering whether or not you have any thoughts, and we'll start with you, Roland, and whether you have any thoughts on how to solve for that paradigm, or is it indeed not solvable, and what the impact of that would be.
Well, first of all, I also think that healthy food should be accessible for everybody. It cannot be that just, a certain segment can afford healthy food. This just triggers more polarization. We try to bring healthy food at an economic price. That's our contribution, because our upcycling, let's call it like that, starts at the earliest possible stage. It's right after the harvest. So, and by this doubling yield effect of nut flour and the milk, the profitability is higher, which allows to think about the price point of these products also in the shelf versus, let's say, a plant-based milk versus a dairy milk, right? One of the big barriers is that they cost more, right? And there again, many people can't afford it. So the mission is to bring that fiber also at an accessible price into the nutrition circle, because fiber of the shells, and by the way, that's a huge category. I mean, nuts is 55 million tons global production. That's 10 times more than cocoa beans. That's 5 times more than green coffee. So we're talking about an ingredient which more and more gets access into the diet thanks to all the healthy contributions it can make, with a growth rate of like 30% over the last 10 years. And all the shells that are falling apart today as a side stream, we want to bring as much as possible in form of fiber into the food product. And instead of shelling it and then thinking about upcycling, we just go in one step with the unshelled nuts and bring that right away into the food ingredient. That means cost of production is lower. And that allows different price points. And I think, you know, to answer your question, that should democratize a bit the accessibility, let's say, also to some healthy ingredients in your food. We all have too much sugar, excessive levels of sugar with all the consequences. Sugar is cheap. We have, at least in the Western diet, enough protein. We have also enough fat. But as you mentioned before, we have a huge gap on fiber. And it's getting worse, right? With the aging population, we need more fiber. And instead of burning it, I mean, it's just our 100% convincement that we have to bring that all as much as possible into the nutritional cycle, also to make it at an accessible pricing.
So I think it's very difficult to get Americans to change their eating habits. There have been some studies done by the USDA that show that you know, having fiber talking about fiber actually puts people off, and really, despite millions of dollars of investment in communicating the benefits of fiber beyond, by the way, the ability to go to the bathroom regularly, but the downstream biological impacts of fiber, which is overall wellness because of the impact it has on your gut microbiome, those messages aren't getting through successfully. So that I think I mean, I'm a fiber dealer too, Roland, so I 100% am with you on that. Webb, what about this conundrum that we're in terms of consumer acceptance, price point, democratizing nutrition, and democratizing access to upcycled products, essentially?
Yeah, like you, I see the data saying that people are willing to pay more, but every CLT I've been in, once they put the food in front of them and give them a price point, they balk at it. So
it's a myth, Webb, that we propagate.
Well,
but let's be honest, it's different.
And a lot of the certifications that go with it when it comes for gluten-free and non-GMO, as soon as money comes up, a lot of the values start to get wavery, and so and it gets into it. But I think when you look at it holistically and you look at you know, 5 years ago versus today, you know, red bell pepper was $3 in the grocery store, but you could buy 5 McDonald's hamburgers. So someone's nutrition based on socioeconomic status was completely different from what it is now. A McDonald's meal is $15, $20. I recently went and bought a single meal at a fast food joint for $20 just for me. And I didn't buy a lot, I bought a meal. But now that $3 red bell pepper is still there. So how do you get the nutrition focused back into the store? And I think ultimately when you come to talking about health and wellness and those things that come to it, and it gets into one of my other soapboxes, and that's ultra processed foods, which is essentially some of the things we're talking about are classified as ultra processed foods because they're not in that whole food state, and it's about portion control. So when you start talking about value for dollar and bigger is better in America, and we have to have more and more for our food, it's not about what we're actually need, what we actually want to consume. It's about how can I get more in me? I mean, portion control for a serving of potato chips is like 14 chips. When's the last time someone ate 14 chips when they sat down to eat? It's open up the bag and grab handfuls of it. So as you start to talk about health and wellness and price point and food, the messaging has to change into health value for dollar and how it's going to make you better. So when you start talking about people are willing to pay more for upcycle food? Are they willing to pay more for health? And are they willing to pay more for environment? I think the younger generations do consider the impact of environment more than the older generations do, because they've convinced that we've left them in a poor state. So there is some of that that's viable when it comes to messaging, but you start to have to really compare price points when it comes at the store and what you're getting out of it.
Ultra processed foods is a whole nother 45 minutes, Webb, which I
big.
can talk about, and my disdain for the Nova classification and how it makes a vulnerable section of society even more vulnerable potentially, etc., etc. Anyway, Christina, your thoughts?
That
was a big that was a big
sorry. Food's about feeling, I think. And I think the problem with one of the reasons why it's hard for consumers to transition is because of their emotional attachments to food, right? It's if they grew up on certain types of foods, it's going to hold a place in their heart and in their minds and in their memories that it's going to be very hard for them to transition away. It's the same with when we talk about nutrition and wanting to eat better for yourself. Yes, it's about the nutritional piece, but it's also around the emotions and the feelings that somebody gets when they know that they're fueling their body appropriately. And so whenever I think about transition for consumers, it's always around taste. It's around that experience. It's around those emotions that they get from having the food and that experience that they're having, right? It's not always just about what they're eating. It's about who they're eating it with, what setting they're eating it in, and what feelings and taste and memories that come back from eating it. So I think when we talk about consumer transition, we have to talk about feelings. I think we have to talk about what the consumer is experiencing and why they're choosing the things they're choosing. And like, I think when we think about like upcycled ingredients, or when there's a certification on a pack, like somebody's choosing that because of a feeling that they get by picking up that package that has the upcycled certification on it. It's because of their background and their education, or what they choose to do with their money, because it makes them feel good, or because it fits their values. So if we don't talk about the consumer experience and why consumers are choosing these things, it's going to be hard to transition to novel ingredients or other materials because of that feeling.
So here's the thing. I mean, we are here, or at least I believe we're all here, because we think that food waste is a dumb problem to have, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we talk about a few dumb problems here in the US these days, but this one is a dumb problem, and it's one of the things that we feel strongly enough that we can do something about. In the food system, there are a number of different issues and challenges that we collectively face. And if we don't take them head on, then this idea of taste and comfort and democratic access to nutrition will become worse, right? And the disparity between the access, so the haves and have-nots, will get bigger. And the thing that I find personally quite difficult is that people are so far removed from how food is grown and how it's made and where it goes to. And we all here, and all the people on the call, spend a lot of time talking about that. But when it comes to going to the supermarket, most people sort of forget about that or don't really want to know. And actually, what worries me is that everybody's children and grandchildren will find it even more difficult to get the things that they like and the comfort and have that connection and so on. And so I think that is, so taking consumers on that journey with us, Christina, which I'm sure is something that you guys talk about at Kerry all the time, is really difficult, because also, let's be honest, we're facing into a situation here where there's lots of fake news. People digest their information from places that you wouldn't expect. I was on a panel with the American Society of Nutrition, talking to some young nutritionists who are at the point in their career where they're just about to graduate and go out in the world. And I said, I think you need to meet consumers where they're at. And let's be honest, most young people get their nutrition information from TikTok. I got told off by some of the other academics, but let's be honest, that's where people are getting their information, and it's not right. It's not always right. So I think, how do we collectively as a community, because we're all in this together, we've chosen to work in the food system. I used to work in beauty, by the way, but now I work in food systems. You know, how do we take the consumer on that journey with us? Christina, I'll do you first.
That is a tough question, I think. So education is what's needed, and how you educate is probably the biggest discussion point, right? And I kind of agree with you. A lot of people get their information off of Instagram and TikTok, and particularly for certain generations, right? And then other generations are going to get their information from other sources. I think part of it is a call to action by the food and beverage industry to help with the education in general, right? If it's on-pack labeling, if it's storytelling, if it's utilization of, I hate to say it, celebrities to help get the message across, then that's maybe what we need to be doing to get the information out there. The problem, I guess you always would say, is there's also fake news out there, which I think the food industry also gets a lot of damage from, because there is no alternative voice out there to change people's minds. So it's a really, really complicated problem to have. And I think everybody has the best intention, but when we think about how we consume information nowadays, it is so fast, and there's so much information out there. It's hard for a consumer to translate it in a way that is going to change behaviors rapidly for the good, I would say, right? So I don't know if I have an answer to your question. Maybe I just added more complexity onto it. But
no, I think what you did was you set us up for another panel, basically. On where we just discussed that for 45 minutes, and then we get into the misinformation around ultra processed foods as well, right, Webb? And we can bring that all together. That's another 45-minute panel.
I have an input here, Lara, on that.
Yes, tell me.
Question.
Tell me, Roland.
You know, sometimes you look to another category, then you can draw some learnings also for the food system. You know, when we talk about the younger generation, I mean, you know, they are fully aware that there is a lot of waste in this world. I mean, they know what is going on in the fashion industry. They are booking a flight and go to the beach, and they find some plastic in the water while they're swimming. I mean, you know, I have some discussions with my son, and I say, how do you look at this? And he say, hey, you messed it up, you know, your generation, and so we are here about to fix it. So we have also a role example, yeah, to move forward, to do positive things, so that their perspective in the future becomes more positive. Because talk to the young people today, they think they don't have the same chances that we had, you know. Now, regarding the responsibility, Christina, you talked about, you know, that the emotions with the food and what we were growing, etc., and the memories, that is so important. And therefore, I think the food industry has a huge responsibility. I mean, look at our foods, you know, look at the content of sugar in our recipes. We have chocolate spreads with 50% of sugar. So the kids are eating that at home during breakfast. And one of the opportunities for, let's say, side streams is exactly that. Think about the shells of the nuts. One of these great applications is reducing the sugar content. in sugary food. And if you want to reduce the sugar, you have to replace it with something, right? If you want to reduce the sugar content in a drink, that's not a problem. You just add more water. And then you do some artificial flavoring to keep it sweet and pleasant for consumers. But what do you do with solid food, like a spread? If you take the 50% of sugar of a chocolate spread out, you just have half of the mass. You have to replace it with something. Where does this coming from? Is it natural enough? What does it cost? I worked, for the biggest food company of this world, and I know how the mechanisms are. When you reduce sugar, your margin goes down because sugar is so cheap, and the food industry is not very keen and interested to do that. Now, here we have a solution because nutshells are cheaper than sugar. They're 100% natural from the nut and add fiber to the spread. So we took a famous spread. We took the 13% of hazelnut out and 13% of sugar out, and replaced that with 26% of our flour containing also the nutshells. And we did some, blind test consumer testing, and it was successful. Slightly less sweet, but through the roasting of the shell, we had all these cocoa notes and vanilla notes, which consumer like on a spread. So why do I say the food industry has a responsibility? We can create products that are better for you, right? Also using like side streams, like the shells in their recipe formulation. As an example, it's a responsibility, right? It's a responsibility.
Okay. I'm just going to take a pause there. Please do put your questions in the chat because we've got at least 15 minutes or so for Q&A. I do want to move this to our last discussion point, which is really, we're talking about the present and some of the challenges we face and the job to be done, basically, as people who are responsible and working within trying to create a responsible food system. But I'm interested to hear from each of you as to what the future looks like for you and what the future of innovation and technology, since this panel is about unleashing innovation. Of course, you can't talk about innovation without talking about the consumer. So I'm going to start with you, Webb. If you're looking forward 5-10 years from now, what does the future of innovation and technology look like exactly within the food system?
So I'm going to blend the last question into this one. I'm just going to pull it up. I think proactive messaging is getting out there in front of things. When it comes to things like ultra processed foods or nutrition, erythritol 2 years ago had a bad rap because of an article. We're just not in front of it, and we can't refute what's already out there because we can't yell loud enough once something's out there. So we just have to be proactive about it, and that's proactive about the impact of upcycling and beyond the food, but into the environment and higher yields and better waste streams and stuff like that. So as you start to look into what that technology is looking at more vertically integrated systems such as nuts, where you're capturing everything from start to finish and you know where it's going to go, instead of trying to find a solution for it. So back to my carrot pulp example for earlier, you had to truck that somewhere to do something different with it, instead of thinking about being located closer to it, so those transportation logistics fees were nominal compared to getting another ingredient in. So, getting that technology and those supply streams and waste streams closer makes it more advantageous, and even internally integrated makes it too hard to do something different. And so once everything's pulled together, it just makes too much sense.
Christina, I know that, well, obviously I was at your Future of Food event during New York Climate Week, so I know that I have a sense of what Kerry feels, but perhaps you'd like to share in a very shortened version with the rest of the audience who didn't have the pleasure of being at that event. I have to say I'm still fangirling over the fact that I got to meet the t-shirt. I got to see the of Ireland.
Yeah, it was great. So just to give some context, Kerry did an event at the Ireland House in New York City during Climate Week. We called it Sustainable
Bites, Plausible Scenarios of the Future, which is based off of some research that we did with Boardbia and Kantar around plausible scenarios of the future and based off of planetary health and consumer access to food or consumption. And so within that, there's multiple different scenarios from the worst one being climate crisis and a story of the haves and have-nots to, that we've protected the planet, that we've innovated significantly, and we are in a state of creativity and experiences where all things go. So very, very different scenarios. Now, I would say Kerry wouldn't say we know the future at all, but we think that there's probably pieces of each of these scenarios that are plausible and that we have control over as those working in the food and beverage industry. I think when we think about 5, 10, 15 years from now, I think there's different steps in how do we transform the food system. As Webb was kind of saying, like, I think the first step for Kerry is utilization of our own byproducts for benefits within our own organization. Because of trying to ship things or move things around, it makes a lot of sense to try to process those materials differently within our own organization to bring value to it. Not only does that help with cost reductions of waste streams, but it also brings additional value within the organization to utilize those byproducts or food loss through our own manufacturing processes and utilize them internally. I think the next thing we would say is that we want to help our customers to deal with their own byproduct streams and how can we bring that back into their organization for utilization into their products. So, what does the future hold in 5, 10 years? Hopefully it would be that we are not creating waste or byproducts anymore. We're just adding value streams within our organizations and utilizing them for value with consumers or for processing aids or any of those things, right? And then maybe even further out is as we help transition consumers and build awareness and education, that you're building portfolios of products that are all from upcycled ingredients or have circular benefits or designs into it, right? Like, I think the ultimate goal is that we are at a circular economy, right? That everything is used and brought back into our economy for beneficial use or value. Now, is that 5, 10 years from now? Probably not, unless we can accelerate certain aspects of our food supply. But 15, 20 years, maybe it's possible.
Well, I mean, it's certainly what motivates me, right? I mean, I am I'm part of the Ellen MacArthur Big Food Redesign Challenge and I'm one of the finalists together with many other people, but also Matriarch Foods, for example, a friend of the fam. They're also part of the challenge, and I think what's central to the challenge and what's central to the competition, if you like, is that we propose food products and concepts that are fully circular. And so and there are 70 companies that are finalists as part of this challenge. So it's entirely doable, basically. It's entirely doable, and the food is tasty and edible and enjoyable and comforting and nourishing and all of those things. So there's plenty of evidence to say that it can be done. Roland, bring us home before I start answering the questions because the questions are piling up and we've only got about 10 minutes to go through those. What does the future? So Renat, you have a disruptive process right now. You are disrupting an existing supply chain, but what would the future of food 2.0 look like for you from a technology perspective?
Well, I think, from the earliest days of farming, societies have relied on basic things like photosynthesis, sunlight, soil, water to grow, the food that sustain us, right? And the reliance on the nature has created some, a food production system that is both fragile but also very resource intensive, right? So what if we could break free from this dependence? What if we could produce food without sunlight, without vast tracts of land, and even without traditional crops? I think, far beyond the future, many companies are already working on that. So shifting the food production into a controlled environment via bioreactor, etc., that will allow us to a bit rethink the relationship between food and land. And there are some technologies out there where companies are working on. I'm sure Christina is aware about, like CO2-based protein production, fermentation, powered by renewable energy. And the use of microbial processes, for example, they offer a glimpse into a future where food is synthesized, rather than grown. I don't think that there will be a complete shift, but we have to think about how to feed this world, right? And right. In a more or less sustainable way. So upcycling, preventing waste streams, etc., that's a must, right? That's a must. That's an obligation. It should be by law. But
yes, I agree.
But if you ask me for the future, then I think we will definitely also be confronted with that new food system that will probably allow to prevent hunger and to feed the growing population and to put less harm and damage to our world in the sustainability way.
I genuinely believe that I think it should be policy that there should be a certain amount of upcycled content in future food systems in order to ensure that we are that we're following reduce, reuse, recycle. I mean, that should be our mantra. And this leads me to one of the questions that's in the chat, actually, which is, what do we collectively see the role of government and policymakers and also non-for-profits in changing this food system? I mean, and obviously, from where I sit, what's very clear to me is first of all, there is no one panacea that's going to fix everything when it comes to the future food system. And we are talking about upcycling and reutilizing waste and reducing waste. But the fact of the matter is that we need all the tools in the toolbox in order to secure the food supply, security of supply, to ensure that people do get fed in the future, right? But what do you see as the role of government, policymakers, and not-for-profits in that future of food system, and how do you see that collaboration changing, improving in the future, Christina?
I think there's definitely a role for government policy. I think we've seen good things around nutrition and accelerating nutrition when policies have been set around on-pack labeling and around sugar, fats, and salts. I think similar tactics and similar drives around waste and carbon and agriculture would also benefit from education or additional funds for supporting transition, right? I think a good example is if there was a policy around providing additional grants for, and there are some out there, but additional grants to help fund the transition of these innovations and technologies to support upcycled ingredients and products, like we are seeing now in regenerative agriculture and money that is supporting transitions for farmers. I think we would see a faster acceleration. So I think policy and government has a role to play in acceleration, for sure. Now, what that looks like exactly, I can't tell you, but I think there is a place for them to play.
Roland, Webb, any thoughts?
I'll add 2 cents. I think there's opportunities with boards and commissions, which come via the government for some of their funding. I know firsthand that this is happening in some instances where not necessarily upcycling of food ingredients, but upcycling of waste products into other areas to further different portion of the industry. And once you get a foothold, hopefully you get a cascading effect and funding in other areas. Some of the technology in these industries 60 years old, 70 years old, and there's not a lot of finances to be able to transition over to new systems. So as you start to prove out new systems, you start to generate some of that goodwill there. If we can get some of that paid in for that research and that understanding what additional products can be upcycled into the food system and outside the food system via the food system, I think there's opportunities in those areas.
Anything you want to add, Roland? I mean, I guess obviously the system is different in Europe than it is in the US anyway. I mean, there are many different.
It is not better or worse, but it's different. And
It's different, yeah.
adding to what my colleagues said, maybe just one thought. When you upcycle, or when we bring the shells into food, like in the case of Renat, we have to go through the regulatory process. In Europe, you call it novel food. It's European Food and Safety Agency. And in the US, you can go for self-GRAS and then, for a no question letter on the FDA. I fully understand that, food companies have to prove that the new stuff is safe for human consumption, right? But the processes go by far too long, right? I mean, we have to spend literally hundreds of thousands of dollars to get some approvals, and the process, it's just very complex. It lasts a very long time, and I think many ideas, they don't hit the market because they just see that all these processes that I have to fulfill, only the large, big CPGs can afford that financial standpoint. So my input here would be, to think about accelerate the regulatory approvals. That would probably also motivate many more people in this world to think about bringing stuff to market that today are not eaten by consumers.
Yeah. Okay. We have well, actually, we're at time. I'm sorry that we didn't get to the last two questions, but we are at 9:01, and I'm conscious of using people's time, especially since Christina is on site somewhere, so which means she has to get back to being in a factory or being in operation somewhere. I just want to say thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. I think the conversation was really great. We probably could have gone for another hour, let's be honest. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the UFA for hosting this. Happy birthday, UFA. Happy 5th birthday, UFA, should I say. I think, Amanda, are you going to pop up the webinar series onto the screen? Just to say that this is webinar 2 in a series of 5 webinars to celebrate the 5th year anniversary of the UFA. Don't forget our next webinar on the 7th, and then again on the 14th and the 20th. And that's it for everybody. Have a great day today. Eat healthily. Make sure you get your recommended daily allowance of fiber, right, Roland? And
sure.
And we will be sharing the resources after this call, so you'll be able to contact everybody if you need to. Thank you so very much. Thank you.